part one of, I'm sure, many parts of fact-checking the presidential debate. I've been researching for hours today to make sure I brought you the best fact check, and I only got halfway through the very first portion when they talked about the economy. And just a disclaimer, I never claim to be unbiased because I do have bias, and it does show sometimes, so just know that. And if you think that I'm missing anything, just add it in the comments. So what I did is I went through the transcript of the debate from like the YouTube video, and that's why it's like in all caps. And I figured I could just read the quote instead of us having to experience that debate again. So Kamala Harris started out by saying that tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest tax credit that we have given in a long time. And if she did pass a $6,000 child tax credit, yes, it would be the largest, I think ever actually. But the last big amount was $3,600 under the Biden administration. That expired, but ultimately anything like this would have to go through Congress. Then Kamala said, my plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses. Again, this would have to go through Congress. And by the way, it looks like we're going to have a split Congress with how recent polling shows. It looks like we're going to have a Republican Senate and a Democrat House. So whether or not Trump or Kamala get into office, it looks like they are both going to struggle to get things through Congress. Now, I added a little note here, which is an opinion, but as a small business owner that works with a lot of small businesses, I would say this is an educated opinion. And I said a better use of resources would be to give small business grants. Because tax credits are nice, but you have to wait sometimes a year to get that money. And a lot of times what small businesses need is capital up front. And right now, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, doesn't give out grants. They only do loans. So like the photographer who just needs a camera to get started, needs $2,000, that would be a better platform for any candidate. Next, she said his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. Trump's tax plan is large tax cuts for workers and no tax on tips. So yes, he's proposing tax cuts, but it would really be for all workers across the board. So yeah, it would be for the rich, but it would also be for the small, the middle class, which is, our waitresses and everything too. And he has also called to expand the child tax credit. This is where Kamala is getting that $5 trillion deficit number from. It's from Penn Wharton budget model. And what they say is that the Trump campaign tax and spending proposals would increase primary deficits by $5.8 trillion over the next 10 years. But I found a couple things interesting about this. Yes, they say that GDP would fall by 0.4%, but they also say that low, middle, and high income households in 2026 and 2034 all fare better under the campaign proposals on a conventional basis. And just to give you some bonus information, they say that Kamala Harris's plan will add $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years. This is a very big disclaimer. The Harris campaign has not released material details associated with some of its proposals. Keep in mind, Kamala Harris only posted her policies literally 2 or 3 days ago. They were lacking critical information. The other thing I want to say about this is they didn't really look into other factors other than their tariffs and child tax credits and stuff like that. So like our military budget is our biggest expenditure right now. So if you have one candidate that is going to end the wars and one candidate that's going to continue the wars, that is going to make a big difference on our deficit. Moving on, Kamala says this, my opponent has a plan that I call the Trump sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that the Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year. I have found 3 different numbers on this. I found $4,000, $2,600, and I found $1,800 a year. And they explain it perfectly. While economists who spoke to US Today said Harris's characterization of the tariffs may be an overstatement, most said Trump's aggressive tariff policy could increase prices. But by how much and for how long is more complicated and debatable. Then it moved over to Trump for his rebuttal, and the caps is so fitting for this one. He said, I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China, In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. From Trump's tariffs, about $79 billion a year has been added to our revenue. And there are some side effects to that. Notably, the Biden administration has kept most of the Trump tariffs in place. Actually announced this year that they would actually like to increase it by $18 billion. I probably won't read this whole thing, but basically Trump says that I had tariffs and yet I had no inflation, but they had some of the worst inflation we've ever seen in our nation's history. And he said that we were at 21% inflation, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. One thing people don't realize is that you have to add inflation each year together. It's a cumulative. So over Trump's term, we had about 7% inflation. Over Joe Biden's term, we've had 19% so far. So, Trump says we had no inflation. We did. We did have inflation. Obviously less than under Biden's term, but we still had it. And in terms of him saying it's the worst in our nation's history, that's not exactly true. As you can see, like the spike right there, but we've had a few other spikes too that were very high. Then Trump said we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums. Honestly, I'm not going to get into what countries they're from and where they came from and all that. I'm just going to tell you how many southern border crossings there have been. There have been about 10 million border crossings under Biden's administration. That does not include all of the gotaways, and we don't know how many gotaways there are because they got away. And Trump said a lot that I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I just put some notes here. This is highly subjective. Everyone measures how well the economy is doing in different ways. The lingering question, though, is if the economy was great, did he actually create it? Or did something else create this great economy? The president before him, Congress, those are questions that I'm going to leave you to decide. So here's the thing. We barely got into the debate and this video is already like 7 minutes long. So I need you to tell me, are you enjoying this? Do you want me to continue? Because it takes me hours to research this and yet we've barely scratched the surface. So I will continue if you guys want me to, or if you want me to just move on in life and maybe do some responses on what I would have said to some questions in the debate. Let's do that instead. But totally up to you guys. It should be easier as the debate goes on. It starts to become more figurative as time goes on and not so fact check heavy. But let me know your thoughts and make sure you're following me for more.